computer. So I will call the meeting to order a few minutes late. Becky, you want to do roll call?
Sure. Councilmembers Perkins,
Here.
DeLucy,
Here.
Hobart,
He's coming.
Here.
thank you.
Okay, the first order of business is approval of our minutes. The meeting was held July 17, 2020. I got the minutes yesterday or the day before, I can't remember. They're pretty long. Has everyone had an opportunity to read them? Any, I have questions about them, but I don't know that I have corrections. Does anybody have any corrections?
I've looked at them. I had to step away for a part of that meeting. So whatever corrections you feel that's needed, I'll back.
Mr. Hobart, did you have an opportunity to look at the minutes? Okay. Well, then I'm going to go ahead and approve them as written, but I do have questions. And Becky, you tell me, is now the time for my questions or do we wait for later? Because my questions involve the Munis stuff. And I know we're going to go into Munis later, so maybe I should ask for specification or clarification later.
I guess it just depends on what your questions are. Your questions on regarding how the minutes were written, are your questions that are regarding the content?
The content.
Yeah,
I didn't understand
clarifying questions. I would just wait until the Munis piece of it, since that's part of today's agenda as well, but you can do it however you'd like.
Okay, I will ask, and Mr. Walker, I don't know if I should ask you or Adam Norris. There was mention in the meeting last month in regards to the audit of IPL that there would be staff comments regarding it, but for purposes of moving that meeting along, because Chester Moyer was here, the staff response to the audit was going to be held. And I don't know if it's going to be addressed today or some other time.
Madam Chair, I'll defer to Mr. Norris and Jim Nail. We did provide written comments. If either of them verbalize those today, that would be fine with me. I don't have any additional comments to provide verbally. But if Mr. Norris or Mr. Nail wish to, let's defer to them.
And that was one of my little bit of confusion, because it seemed like the staff comments from IPL were already addressed within the audit, but then Adam mentioned that there were other staff comments, I thought, but I could have misunderstood Adam. So Adam, I'm putting you on the spot. Do you have anything that you'd like to do or say regarding the audit from other staff comments?
No, I think the purpose of what I was saying there was that the department provided a response, a written response, and then the city manager's office provided a response, and we would have those responses stand, and I think they stand on their own. I didn't think we need to go.
Okay, thanks, Adam. Okay, June and July financial report. And that is the monthly operating and financial and operating report from June and July 2020. We got these yesterday. And I reviewed July. I didn't really review June. But Mr. Kidney, do you want to do a presentation? I don't know how you want to do it.
Well, I would, would you mind muting yours? Thank you. I wouldn't want to take the city manager's thunder away from him on his year-end budget conversation to go into June. I'd be happy to answer anything specifically for July.
Okay. Page 1 is the general fund. I'm now looking at just July. There now.
There you go, your mic's on.
Right, okay.
All right,
Okay,
sorry.
page 1 is the general fund. And I know that it's picky, but under expenditures, it's city council and strategic goals. We don't have any strategic goals. That fund is gone. So I just would suggest that we alter that. Unless we're gonna have money in strategic goals, which I would love, but I don't think we have any. And then I had a question under expenditures also, right above debt service, general government. And I don't know what general government expenditures means. I've never seen that category before.
So, yeah, you would have seen that as part of the budget presentation because that was part of the budget. I'm trying to, these are items that are department-wide expenses or citywide expenses that aren't necessarily allocated directly to a department at this time.
Okay. So they're just general expenses across for what?
I'm going to look at Zach, but I believe this is where a portion of the reserve that was held back was included.
Is that right, Zach?
Sorry, I had to find my microphone. Yes, I believe, Councilman Regalucci, as you'll see in my presentation in a minute, the budget was built with a $1.5 million contingency for fiscal year 21 against further revenue decline for COVID-19. So I believe that's what this is reflecting right there, the July portion of that total $1.5 million contingency.
Councilmember DeLucy, your microphone's muted and we can't hear you.
Dan Hobart's helping with my computer. So it's not 1.5 expenditure. It's earmarked, but it's not spent.
That's correct. It's a contingency against further decline in COVID-19.
Okay. Thanks very much. Okay.
So just, there's your.
Okay, thanks. So Zach, should we put it under expenditures if it's not really spent? Or should we put it under like a restricted down at the bottom?
It may be
Because to me,
best.
it looked like we spent it.
Yeah, so it's revenues that haven't been appropriated. So there's an appropriation, or there's revenues, but we haven't appropriated it for a use. So it may be best, and this is where I'll have to lean on the wisdom of the certified finance experts, but I believe it may be better put as a reserve down in the fund balance. Brian, could you weigh in on that though?
Sure. Technically, thank you. Technically, you would need to go to council to reallocate that regardless if it's in reserve fund balance or if it's in a department. So if we're moving it from one department, which would be in this case general government, to another operating expense, you would have to go to council for that. You're going to have to go to council regardless in order to spend this. So, but we could show it down there to take out the expenses.
Or you can just say general government reserve. I just don't want it to look like we've spent it. That's all. And on
And on page 7, animal shelter use tax. And then there's another animal shelter Oh, property tax levy on page 9.
Mhm.
It's not an animal services property tax levy. It's a health property tax levy.
Hey,
And I
Councilmember
would-
Casey,
Yeah,
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but we're getting a
No,
lot
go
of feedback on this side.
I know.
So I think for whoever's in that room, you're gonna need to make sure that you're muting your computers and your microphones if you're not speaking to eliminate that feedback.
Okay,
You're perfectly
Everybody's
clear
shaking
now.
their heads, yes.
Everybody should be fine, but that's what's gonna need to happen for that feedback not to happen.
okay. Anyway, if we could on page 9, just call it a health property tax levy, I'd appreciate it. Yeah. Brian just said in the title and I said, yeah. Mr. City Manager, on page 15, the license surcharge money, we have almost $3 million. And I just was curious as to what is that money earmarked for?
To the best of my knowledge, we don't have a use assigned to that total right now, council member.
Is that committee active?
No, they've not met in some time, I would say several years.
Do we still have a suspension on collecting the license surcharge fees?
We do.
We might want to put something on the council agenda to discuss almost $3 million if it's just sitting there, especially in today's climate.
Yeah, I would agree.
And I assume the July sanitary sewer category on page 19 is the old water pollution control category from June.
Correct.
Mr. Kidney, is that right? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Page 25 in the July statement, it's enterprise resource planning. What is enterprise resource planning? I've never heard that category before. I don't know what it is.
Be a very fancy term for Munis.
Okay. Thank you.
Right, well,
So could you explain the Munis fund, Mr. Kidney? Because it looks like we have a negative 672,000.
Yes, that's correct.
So that's what we still owe on the project?
No, that is the negative fund balance in this project. In 2019 fiscal year, there was not enough money budgeted to charge back the departments to keep this fund from going into the red.
Okay. So what are we doing?
So what we're doing is we're tagging on a little bit extra each year to charge back the department and stretching that out an additional year.
And it says my microphone's muted, but I know it's not, and I apologize. I know that's real weird.
It's your speaker. But I'm not having a problem with it.
I think that was it for my questions on the operating. Everybody else does. John, you?
Mr. Perkins, do you have any questions? We see your mouth moving, but we don't hear you.
Sorry. The 672 that Brian was just explaining about the Munis project being in the hole, is that just from the interdepartmental transfer going into that to help offset that cost for implementation for that?
Sorry, I didn't hear his question.
Say it one more time, a little louder, John.
The 672 that's in the negative, is that because of the departments that are utilizing that new system that are not paying for or not able to pay that service down?
Yeah, so in 2019, there was not enough budgeted so this fund operates as a business, if you will, internally. So it pays for the software and pays for project management and things like that, and then subsequently charged back to the departments based on their allocated amount that they use. There wasn't enough. It was simply a case of not billing or charging out enough to those departments last year.
Now, is that COVID-19 related, or did we just miss those budgeted numbers to help get that number to a zero representation?
The plan is to have that at zero within the next couple of years. We don't want to hit the funds too hard in 1 year.
Okay.
So we just need to make it up over time. So we'd like to have it zeroed in within a year.
Okay.
Or 2 years, I'm sorry.
2 years? Okay.
And he had asked, was it COVID related?
Anybody else have a question about the operating or financial report? Okay, now we do the specific line item expense report. Item 5. Is this you again, Mr. Kidney? Is this Zach? What is this? I want to know how we're coming on the money, and I didn't understand what this report was.
So Councilmember, I'll go ahead and introduce this. During the budget process, I believe the committee, the council, and specifically you had asked about a couple of items. Let me use some examples like our training budgets, our travel budgets, et cetera. How those were being spent down, allocated, et cetera. Particularly with the COVID-19 pandemic, we understood that we likely were not going to be doing as much travel, training opportunities, et cetera. The council chose not to reappropriate the budget. The budget amendments you put forward were voted down, but you did ask after the fact that we would go ahead at the monthly audit and finance committee meetings and reports specifically on a few items with regard to the status of those budgets so we could monitor those. So we made note of those, and Mr. Kidney has been tracking those, and I believe that's what he was going to provide an update on for you this afternoon.
Okay, and I got the report. I just don't understand how to read it. I don't understand what I'm looking at.
So Brian, if you go ahead and walk him through that, we'd be grateful.
So what we simply did is along the headings are those specific line items that you asked to cut out of the budget. Along the side are those departments. So it's just basically a grid. So for instance, the very first column you requested to cut out the lobbying charges. And so this is saying that used to come out of, or that comes out of the city manager budget for 30,000, municipal service, WPC for 30,000,
Okay,
water admin 30,000, and IPL for 30,000. Okay, and then reading, and then in the last column is the 2021 actual. So the last column of each of those groups will tell you what has been spent, in this case in July, compared to the budget.
okay.
So, and then, yeah, the top just breaks out. Each one of those would give you 19 actual, 20 actual, 21 budget, and 21 what has been spent against that budget.
Okay.
So it's a pretty detailed report, actually. And I was just trying to figure out a way to give it to you where you have everything right there. And then the very last page then would have the totals for the whole.
Okay,
All
well,
those specifically.
like page 2, there's the law library, finance and administration law.
Mhm.
And it tells me that we spent $8,112 in 2020?
No,
No, what does it tell me?
no, it says that, oh yeah, in 2020, I'm sorry. In 2020, we did spend $8,112. In 2021, there was $23,000 budgeted. You will not see, or you'll see very little of that actually spent in 2021.
Okay,
So far it's zero that's being spent so far.
okay, I'm just curious, what did we spend $8,112 on in law? That's what I wanted to know. Like,
Okay.
what are we spending it on? That's all.
Well, that was
So-
spent last year, and I believe it was Westlaw
Okay, I thought Westlaw,
or
okay,
West Publishing, looks like.
okay.
Yeah, it says right up there, actually, West Publishing.
And then page 3, $9,005, finance and administration memberships for 2020. Do you know what those memberships were?
This is the 24,000
No, it's $9,005.
for memberships.
24,000.
Sorry, I'm looking at the,
NLC, does that help? NLC, I don't know what that means.
well, that'd be the city's membership to the National League of Cities.
National League of Cities, okay.
Yes, oh, where it says finance administration memberships, those are citywide memberships, not just specifically to the
Yeah, I didn't know.
finance department, yeah. For some reason, they felt that they should stick that
Okay,
under themselves. So those are the big citywide memberships.
okay, okay. IPL. These pages aren't numbered, but what's the last page? I'm just curious, like IPL, systems operations. I don't know what that means. Is that meetings? Like, is systems operations a department of
That-
IPL?
Yeah, that's a department.
And so that department spent the 11,168. Okay. So all these under IPL are departments within IPL?
Yes.
Okay,
And I will say that so that 11,168 was a total spent out of those line items for the year for 2020 for prior
Okay.
year.
from January 1?
No, fiscal year 2020, starting in July of 2019 to June
Okay,
2020.
so this is all fiscal years. Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Got it.
so I plan on just having that for each month
Great.
and
I appreciate that. Now I know how to read it. Now I understand what I'm reading. Thank you. Anybody have a question about that? Just me. Okay. Munis update.
So the really big update from last month is, as we talked about, we were looking at contracting with
Could you speak up, Brian?
we're looking to contract with a project manager, contacting our networks and talking to other communities. We were looking for one that has experience in quote unquote stalled projects, those projects that were initiated, started, but then is having trouble finishing the crossing line. So Ron Luz, who's a director with Soft Resource, came recommended by some of our peers as someone who could do that. He has a lot of experience in coming in and assessing where implementations may have gone wrong. Also comes in and helps negotiate contracts with any kind of vendor, such as if we have an issue with Munis, he'll step in for us and kind of talk the talk. He's been in the industry for 20 years, and so knows how to talk to these large software companies and has experience to do so. So we got a hold of Ron and asked him to come in and give us a hand. I will say already we've had one meeting, kind of our kickoff meeting, and from that, you'll see that second page, he started an implementation project management project. Sorry, I'm having a little trouble here. The first bullet there, the project startup, that's where we started. He's in the second phase right now of discovery. And as he works through that discovery phase, he's starting to put together calendars and due dates, how we're going to communicate to everybody. And so you'll see the rest of these bullets next time in a priority and with time schedules in order to meet the time goals on these projects. So he's actually on the call right now. And so I would just introduce Ron. So Ron, if you want to go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, Soft Resources is a software selection consultancy. This is what we do all the time. We do systems assessments for municipalities, counties, state, local, provincial governments, software selection, and part of our business is also implementation, project management, implementation oversight. And so what we're engaged to do here is to come and take a look at your project as is. This is what's going on, and try to help figure out where we need help, what we need to focus on to get us across the finish line and get Munis implemented. So in order to do that, we're going to be talking to all the stakeholders and talking to Tyler and trying to figure out where we're at. And as Brian said, come up with a plan. Here's the prioritization. Here's where you need to focus your energies. And here's a roadmap and how long we think it's going to take to get this done. And so we're going to come up with a report. I would suspect that report will probably be done in the end of October, but we'll be doing a lot of our heavy lift work in September to get you that report. That makes sense?
It does. I'm just frustrated. Poor Mr. Ron. I'm just frustrated because we spent a lot of money and we bought something, and I still don't know if what we bought is what we got. And so we have another consultant coming in to look at an overview and tell us what we got. I asked the city manager yesterday to give me a copy of the contract, thinking I could simply look at the contract and say, okay, did we get this, 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 and this? Only, of course, the contract's like 400 pages long. I have nothing against consultants, but I'm just very frustrated that here we are 4 years down the road and it's still not implemented. And I assume you're paying you for your time. And once you do the assessment, then we still have to implement what you've assessed, correct?
That's correct. What we're going to do is try to help you to prioritize. We come in, we do our work, and then we're out. We can stick around a little bit and help with some project management, but that's not really our remit here, right? Again, we do this quite a bit. In fact, we did something a little bit similar with the city of Lawrence, Kansas, with a utility billing project. So we're going to come in and tell you what we think you need to do. We're not here to charge you lots and lots of money and elongate this. We want to get you going and get you up and implemented, right? This is not uncommon. It happens a fair amount where implementations, for whatever reason, you could have staff turnover. Lots of things can happen where it isn't what you thought it was going to be. But I will say that Munis is a solid product. We've seen it in many, many municipalities across the country. So I think with a high degree of confidence, we should be able to get you up and going.
Once you give us an assessment, though, we do need to have a project manager, correct?
That's correct. You will need a project manager on the Munis side, which I believe you already have. You absolutely
Who is that?
I don't know what's the name of the person, Brian? I have not talked to them yet. You're on mute. We'll find out who it is, and I will talk to them. They might be assigning us a new person. I'm not sure, but you will definitely need someone on the Munis side and someone on the city side to make this happen and have the resources available to complete the project.
Well, on the city side, who's the project manager?
I think they're still trying to identify that at this point. Is that correct, Brian? Brian, I still show you on mute.
Yes, we are still trying to identify that. The problem is, as you know, that having a full-time project manager, I think reading through the contract with Munis, I believe the requirement was 20-hour-a-week position for project management, or at least that's what they recommended. And we were attempting, or our first proposal, actually, we talked about this a little bit, is to have several people kind of come together as one project man, to take the role of one project manager. I'm not sure that's going to be practical, and that's one of the things I wanted to speak with, obviously, Soft Resources about. We also identified a retiree from another community that has implemented and used Munis quite a bit, and we are looking to bring her on board to work with some things. And it might be a case where she would be the project manager too. So we have several options out there. None of them perfect, but yeah.
So in theory, we can just go really back to zero gain and start from the beginning is kind of what it's looking like we're headed after this amount of time, and we're going to spend an extra dollar amount on top of what we've already paid for.
I haven't dove in too much, but from what I understand from your reports that I've read, that a fair amount of this is already implemented, right? Some of this, it's already up and running. So there are certain modules or portions of modules that are not running. Is that correct, Brian? I believe so. Is that?
I have the financial report from July saying 30% remaining of the financials.
Okay.
And so that means 70% is done, but 30% isn't done.
Mm-hmm.
If I could interject real quick, this is Zach and Mark, Toma Perry, if you could help me. There were two projects associated with this acquisition. There was the Human Resources Management System, which really allows the city to process the hiring, the promotions, the transfers, the employee records, anything you would think of related to human resources management. And it's my understanding that project is complete. And when we were working with a really entirely different project team, that was when that project was done. I asked Mark because he was project manager at the time. The financial payroll component was the portion that I believe you're referring to, Councilman, that it's 70% complete with 30% left to go. Mark, did I misspeak there at all? Please correct me if I did.
The HRM piece was not complete when I left the project a year or so ago. That was kind of the last phase. We were working on the payroll timekeeping piece, which the payroll piece was implemented, I believe, in January. Timekeeping is pending. And I think the 70% refers back to the financials. Majority of it came online in July of 2018. And the remaining pieces to work on chart of accounts and capital projects, things like that, were still pending.
Okay, I guess I'm just gonna jump into the question that I got on the minutes of July 17. Munis, we had 5 primary goals: core financial, purchasing, fixed asset inventory, human resources, and payroll. And those were our 5 big ones. And then we got into, Mr. Kidney, you started talking about the chart of accounts budget. And you said that the way the chart of accounts was put together is causing problems for the transparency module and some of the advanced reporting modules. So there needs to be revisions. I don't know what that means. I have no idea what that means. Is that with core financial, fixed asset inventory, human resources, or payroll? And what revisions? Is that what Ron's going to be working on, revisions, or are you going to take an analysis of what we've got?
So we may ask Ron to take a look at how we have that set up. There is, our chart of accounts is not set up in conformity, if you will, with the normal way chart of accounts would be set up.
What are charts of accounts?
Oh, okay, account numbers. So when you have personnel, you have a department listed, just like we went over with that department numbers that go from here, here, and here.
That's not done yet?
It is done. They were done differently than what's the normal way for account numbers to be put together.
Did we follow the Munis system? That was a yes from Mr. Tolman Perry.
Yes,
This is when you were there?
the accountants set that up according to the best of their ability.
So what needs to be revised?
The chart of accounts. Without getting into personnel issues here, the chart of accounts, again, we've got great accountants, but the project director, there was not a finance person that understood that in order to run these advanced reports, you had to put them in a way that makes sense under GF rules and regulations.
So are we going to be paying Ron to do something we should have already done?
No, I don't believe so. Ron's role as a project manager, there's project management money that's allocated to this project that we never spent because when we had our last project manager, we didn't go back and fill that position. So this is the money spent for Ron is the normal amount that we would be spending for a project manager on this project.
Ron, are you going to be looking to see if we should modify our order from Munis?
I'm sorry, you modify what? Didn't catch that, Karen.
Modify the order we actually have with Munis?
We could look at what we originally contracted for, and maybe that has changed, and we can certainly renegotiate that with Munis. That's definitely a possibility. If there's something maybe we purchased that we're not going to use, maybe something we need that we didn't purchase. So yeah, that's certainly possible. On the chart of accounts, it's normal practice your chart of accounts is kind of like a roadmap of how you can allocate your funds down to a very granular level and how you keep track of them. It's very common to rebuild that, just the way you label that, just because it probably hasn't been done for many, many, many years. And I don't know if you did it last time. So it's not uncommon to kind of rebuild that roadmap because things changed the city over the years. So if it wasn't done, this might be a good idea to take a look at that and decide if it's fitting the best way the city does business today. And so that's something that you definitely would want to look at. And it sounds like Brian is interested in that, but that's normal.
Okay, I would caution you that the council as a whole voted, I think, almost $5 million 4 years ago to do certain things within Munis. And I do not want to alter anything the council as a whole has decided they wanted to do in a vote. I mean, if you determine through your investigation that we don't need this widget, you can certainly talk about maybe we want to get rid of the widget, but I don't want you to assume that we will get rid of the widget because the council said we wanted it.
Absolutely. We're going to come up with here's what we think you need to do to have a successful implementation based on what you are looking for and what you probably need. So, and then you can look at that recommendation, either run with it or not, but we'll help you we're gonna be with you every step of the way. I'll be at this meeting every month, right? To help
I'm
tell you
mostly
what-
concerned about payroll, Ron.
Okay,
We've had a lot of issues with payroll,
okay,
and we just started a new fiscal year. And I know we have headaches from last fiscal year that we're gonna have to deal with this fiscal year. So I want to minimize the payroll problems. So that to me is my number one priority. If you're looking at the 5 primary factors we looked at, to me, payroll's number one. I don't know if Mr. Perkins agrees with that, or Mr. Hobart, or Mr. Walker, but payroll to me is number one. Can you do your work like that to put payroll as number one?
well, we need to talk to all the stakeholders of the different, because they all kind of come together, right? Yeah, payroll, you don't want to have problems in payroll. That's the last place you want to have problems. But we need to talk to the financials, the human capital management, HR, your performance-based budgeting, capital assets, cash management, all that, because they kind of come together. But yes, I will make sure that that payroll's is top of the list.
I would really appreciate it. Gentlemen, do you guys want to weigh in on any of this? Mr. Hobart, Mr. Perkins?
Connection.
I'll jump in real quick. So last meeting, I had to leave as you guys are really diving into the Munis account stuff. So I don't want to rehash an old meeting, but looking at the minutes and stuff on the bottom of page 7, we're talking about the XU time spreadsheet. And then the second to the last sentence there, when Councilman DeLucy's asking the question, that Mr. Kidney's response is he doesn't feel the extra time is going to be able to work on fire department union payrolls. So with that discussion, is that something that we have to look at to find a different software, for lack of the terminology here, to be able to interface with Munis better?
So there's an issue. Sorry, go ahead.
I guess what I'll say is that's absolutely an item that we were going to be asking Ron to help us assess whether or not it's worth the investment to change or to add additional like spreadsheet work or something for these to for the union pay types to make it easier for people to input versus, I mean, and that's more of a employee time issue, amount of time spent, versus looking to see if we can find a more efficient solution. Because the most important thing, and you're right, is to make sure all employees are being paid correctly.
Well, fire department is definitely a unique department in and of itself, the way they have their out of position pays and the whole list of stuff. So whatever we choose has got to be able to work and be able to be manipulating the correct out of positions, whatever the terminology that our payroll needs to use for that department, because it's tremendously unique. I don't believe the PD is as unique as that. I think fire department is probably the most standalone unique department we have.
Ron, this is Dan Hobart. I'm borrowing Karen's computer. So, hi. Here would my expectation for you would be, and in the simplest terms possible. One, is Munis work for us? And I mean across the board. Fire, IPL, IPD, all the other staff, water, all the budgets, or all the departments, especially for payroll. This is, I know you have to have a global view. You have to talk to everybody. I get that. Payroll needs to be fixed 6 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
This is a critical problem. So from my perspective, from a council perspective, this has to be fixed and as soon as possible. If it can't be fixed, we need to know exactly what we should do. Whether it's a different software, whether it's more modules, whatever it is, because at some point, we're gonna have to make a decision on whether to get more people, whether to do something else, whatever it is. You follow me? Of course you do.
Yes. Yep.
Right, but we've got to get rid of the uncertainty. I can't tell you how much hearing these percentages gets under my skin. Either software works or it doesn't. Right? 70%, 30%, 40%. This is not helpful from my perspective. I may be wrong. It may be a naive position to be in. I'm not saying it has to be implemented immediately, 100% everything. I am. Well, what I'm saying is we have to have a path to finish this, and it can't be 1 to 2 years. Like it can't be. We're very close to the point of no return on this thing. So I don't know if you understood that the passion or the feelings from the council people, at least Ms. DeLucci and I, are that strong, but I wanted to make sure you understand that.
And when people aren't getting paid correctly, that creates a massive problem. And that's what it sounds like. That's what I'm hearing. Payroll issues.
It is.
And I will say, from a timekeeping and payroll perspective, some of the most complicated engagements tend to be public safety and fire because of their really complicated pay rules. And so there are specific applications that do that. I'll have to dive in and take a look and see where Munis is at. But I understand completely the issue from what I'm hearing from you. So I know where to start.
Do you have any misgivings or apprehensions about diving into a Munis system? You feel comfortable with that software and their architecture, that you can understand it and really tell us nuts and bolts?
We've worked with Munis many times over the years. Like I said, it's a solid product that you didn't choose. You didn't choose a bad product at all. So there should be a way to make this work. Yeah, I'm sure that we can navigate through this, and we can give you a roadmap on what we think it's going to take to get this up and running correctly, right? And where there may be deficits, and maybe where there's renegotiation possibilities with Munis, if that comes up.
You said that you could have a full report probably done by October.
That's my goal, is to get, we're going to try to do meet all the stakeholders in the next few weeks. And then, the report's 5 to 10 pages. And then we're going to help you prioritize what we think it's going to take to get it up and running. And where there may be deficiencies, and maybe Munis needs to provide more resources, maybe the city needs to provide more resources. We'll cover all that.
Would it cause you a problem if we asked you to come back? Our meeting is the last Friday of each month. So can you give us a mid-report update if we ask you to come back in September?
Right now, I'm planning on coming back every month for this meeting for the duration.
Yeah, I want to check there, council member. One of the things that we've asked Ron to do is be here every month with a status and progress report, reporting what's happened in the last 30 days and what to look forward to in the next 30 days.
And if a miracle from heaven happens and you fix payroll, don't wait till the end of September.
Okay. All right.
Seriously, I mean, it's that critical.
Yeah, we have to. Payroll is going to be complicated, especially, like I said, for fire and then public safety, without even having looked under the hood yet. I can tell you from experience, but there are ways to fix it.
I'm going to have to step in, and I have my staff are watching, of course. There has not been a mistake on payroll due to a Munis issue for 3 or 4 months. The Munis implementation, the mechanics of Munis is working. My staff has successfully done that. What the problem is, it's extremely complicated to get it done properly. And so what we're having is people who enter time make mistakes because of how complicated it is. That's what we're trying to streamline and make easier for people. But I can answer the question right now. Munis is implemented and working. It's the getting data properly into the Munis payroll that is the pain point.
Okay, so who puts in the fire? Like
I'm
who
not
puts in?
gonna talk about
No, I
personnel
mean,
issues.
does finance do it or does fire do it?
Each department enters their own time.
Okay, and so each department enters time, ship it to finance, I guess?
It goes into the payroll system, yeah.
Okay, and that's your department. And if there's been a mistake, should it have been caught in the individual departments?
That would be best practice. And so what our attempt to do is we want to provide more review resources, more tools for the people entering the data, so they have a more that they have a backup to make sure that a mistake is not happening before it's in the payroll. That's what we're trying to fix right now, not the payroll mechanics, rather helping the departments enter payroll time properly, have a mechanism for an audit process for them to make sure that the data was entered. Maybe even to the point where the employees can see it on real time and that this is what they're going to get paid. That's what our goal is. We want to make sure that employees know as their hours are entered what they're going to get paid. And that's that.
So where's the review of the Munis system? Like, I understand a firefighter got paid under $5 an hour because there was a mistake. Assume that mistake was made in fire. It came over to finance and a check was issued and it was $4 or $5 an hour for the firefighter. At what point do we say that's not possible? We have to have some kind of review of some type.
And there are reviews, but there's also 1,100 employees to review. And that's why we're asking to make sure that the departments and the managers are seeing the hours that are entered. That's how payroll systems work in a complex organization.
I have to tell you, Ron, we didn't have this problem before Munis.
If I can jump in. So to boil it down to its essence, are we missing or did we miss a component of training to the whatever the payroll person is in each department and however that flows to the finance department for the final check release? Did we miss a key component of training to make sure people understand in their own departments what it is they need to do specifically to get this entered in correctly?
Yeah, that was a major issue as part of this implementation. That when I came on board, I did not feel that there was enough training happening for the end users. And by the time the project management changed over and Cindy ended up getting that job, we were under pressure. There was training every single week leading up to that for just the people on the finance side doing the training. There was only a couple opportunities for the outside departments to get additional training. Now I'll say, I thought my staff did a really good job. They went out to every department. They understood the fire department was going to have a lot of difficulty, not because of their capabilities, but just because of the complexity of the actual payroll that they're working with. That's what we're working on. We're on payroll. We're working on making it easier and get more training to the end users, more one-on-one, but also try to put together, and this is where I was talking about, we need to make that decision. Do we go out and find good data entry systems that that have the internal audit built into them. Or, you know, we look at other options. Now, one of those options is the timekeeping device, which was also purchased. However, we're hearing from Munis now that they're a little unsure whether or not that timekeeping piece that we purchased will work for our fire department because of all the additional pay codes. So that's that decision point that needs to be made. And that's why we bring in a person like Ron to look at that contract, look at what happened, and be our advocate with Munis. It's like, what the heck? What's going on? You said it would work. Now we're hearing it's not. So what is our resources, or what's our availability to make this happen?
So on
And look at
page,
functionality gaps too, to identify any functionality gaps.
Again, I'm sorry, I just need to make sure my staff has worked incredibly hard to get this software to work, and they've done so. But it's just an extremely complicated software.
So on page 8 of the minutes, when we're talking about the fire system payroll, that if this is a product that we cannot use for our fire department, that is a product that we can credit back to Munis as not being able to work, and take that funding that we would have used for this and acquire a software or something that would work. Is that part of the contract?
I'm going to have to turn to Ron, and probably Ron hasn't been in this long enough. I don't know if he's had any experience with being able to do that.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's the software itself, it's the data collection part of it. That's a problem, or a challenge, if you will. It could be a case, you know, there's very specific software for fire. I think Firehouse is the name of a software that does a lot more things than just the payroll part. It runs great reports, run times, things like that. That would really be a big benefit for the management over at the fire department, or not just management, everyone there. So that might be, that could be an option. But again, that's why we're having Ron come in and help us. We don't want to start going down this road without doing an analysis. Does that really make the most sense in the long run?
Okay.
So we just want, it is so important. I mean, this is my staff would admit, this is the sleepless night software for us. And we just want to make sure it's in there correctly. And we don't want to take a huge bite on something that says, okay, now this will do it. And then we get caught again with, well, no, it won't. So we really want to do that analysis. And I think we brought the right people in to help us do that.
Councilmember DeLucy, can I add something real quick, please? This is Adam Norris. I just wanted to add that, you know, we understand the concerns relative to payroll, and that part of the reason we are actively hiring a payroll manager to help us, you know, oversee and manage that entire process. It's one of the most important things we do, internal service, and so providing the necessary management oversight and expertise for that is vitally important, and we're in that process right now. So.
Okay. Anybody else want to weigh in? Mr. City Manager, I would ask.
Can you make sure that under the contract, we're not in violation and Tyler Technologies is not in violation? I'm not going to have a chance to read 400 pages, but our law department should be able to.
I'm going to be working with the city attorney and with Ron to make sure that the deliverables in that contract, if there are any breach of contract issues, that they are held accountable for that, for the contract, and our opportunities to do so. And I will report back to the committee on our findings with that and the action steps we take.
And it's a two-way street, because I understand we were supposed to have a project manager all along, and we haven't. So I'd like to know where we're deficient also.
We'll be happy to do so.
Thanks. Okay, fiscal year, year-end update. Mr. Walker or Mr. Kidney?
Yeah, I'll take this one on, Madam Chair. Becky, could I drive the bus for a bit? Okay. Is everybody now viewing my screen, the PowerPoint? Good.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, Madam Chair, members of the committee, what I would like to do today is give you an update on where we finished our fiscal year that ended June 30th, 2020, as well as take a look ahead to some degree for the fiscal year that began July 1, 2020 and June 30, 2021. As the committee will remember, we projected COVID impacts back in late March, that we're going to have some significant impact on our financial position, particularly on our sales tax revenue. My staff and I really began to prepare for the worst and hope for the best, though there were really very few clues by which to follow. We tried to read different various economic forecasts to try to make the most informed decision that we could. What this chart will remind you is what the committee would have seen in early to mid-April, as far as what we were estimating our revenue loss to be for the remainder of that fiscal year that ended June 30, as well as what we plan our revenue losses to be for the new fiscal year, July 1, 2020. So with that in mind, we really began to take some immediate actions to try to shore up our financial position. A couple of actions that we took: we had a hard hiring freeze in place, meaning that unless positions were absolutely essential to some of the basic life safety issues, we did not hire. And we also went into some very stringent emergency spending actions as well, meaning that unless it was, again, a life safety issue or directly related to our COVID response, departments were prohibited from spending their appropriation. Secondarily, one of the bold steps recommended by this committee and ultimately endorsed by the full city council was an interfund loan of up to $25 million to provide us a backstop should the worst come to pass for our budget. What I'd like to report to you today, though, is where we finished fiscal year 2019-20. The graph you're looking at here are our general fund revenues. I may draw your attention to the far right-hand column, which are the differences between the forecasted budget and where we actually ended. Some general fund revenues did fall short as anticipated, but others did not. We anticipated some of these revenues to decrease further into the next fiscal year. For example, I might reference our gas tax, where we see a 2-month lag in collections. So we're probably going to see the fallout from that in July or August revenues. Some of the more substantial decreases in our general fund revenues occurred in the first line, which is the sales tax, where we saw a $2.1 million shortfall, in our municipal court fines and forfeitures, where we saw close to a $900,000 shortfall. That primarily being attributed to the fact that the court was closed for several weeks during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. What this graph represents to you is our general fund expenditures by department, but for an unplanned election and overages in the fire department due to overtime costs, our city departments really showed very strong fiscal management and came in under budget on their expenses. When I reference an unplanned election, the budget that I submitted to the council for this fiscal year 19-20 had 2 elections planned. We ended up bearing the cost for 3 different elections. That would have been the one for the use tax, the one for the city council primary, and then the city council general election. So that's what's reflected in the city clerk's budget. Madam City Clerk didn't go on a spending spree. She just got stuck with a 3rd election. So here's the big upshot between revenues and expenditures. Revenues did fall short of the adopted budget estimates, but not as severely as we forecasted in our April projections. Our ending fund balance then in the general fund is about $5.3 million, or slightly over 7%. This is, of course, vastly improved over what we were forecasting when we reported to the committee in April. The simplest explanation I have for you here is that consumers continue to spend at their normal rates, but shifted their spending away from the experiences that they were typically going for and into goods. So for example, they weren't staying in hotels or going on trips as much, but they were heading to more of the retail stores. Target, for example, reported eye-popping numbers for the second quarter of 2020. Target reported that their online sales at stores that have been open for at least a year climbed by 24% during the quarter that ended August 1st, which is an all-time high for them. I might also point out Lowe's, which is the home improvement store. It said its second quarter revenue surged 30% as consumers shifted their spending to home improvement projects. So when you look at our forecast versus actual here, this is where you're seeing the 1.8% fund balance that we thought we were going to fall to versus the 7% where we actually ended. As I mentioned, mostly this is due to the fact that folks shifted their spending but didn't stop spending altogether. Take a quick look at our sales tax funds. The shift away from experiences and into goods and services can really be illustrated here in our sales tax funds. Each of the sales tax funds actually performed slightly better than what we were forecasting at the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic, except for the very last one on your list here, which is your transient guest tax, which you saw about a $440,000 decline. Again, because people just weren't staying in hotels and taking the trips that we were typically seeing. The use tax, which was put in place by our voters last November, really continued to blossom and bloom. The council and the committee may recall that we forecast an annual collection of $1.5 million through June of this year. We have already collected $1.6 million, far exceeding the amount that we forecasted for 1 year. If you annualize that out over a 12-month period, we're looking at close to $5.1 million in collection from the use tax. If I can use some of the stores again as an example, Target reported that its online sales surged by more than 700% and attracted 10 million new digital customers. Lowe's, which I also use as an example, saw their website sales surge by 135% as the pandemic forced more and more people to shop online. Quickly looking at our utilities budgets, only the electric utility saw a loss. That was largely driven by an unseasonably cooler spring and summer. So folks using their AC less than would have normally been the case. So that budget saw a $3.8 million loss, but water saw a gain of $5.9 million and sewer about $1 million there. So this is a reminder of the budget that was adopted by the City Council and went into effect July the 1st. This was a very conservative budget that was shaped and influenced heavily by the COVID-19 pandemic. Overall, the budget was down 2% or about $5.1 million. General fund, we budgeted revenues less than $5 million and expenses $4.9 million less than the previous year. And as a reminder, as we talked earlier in this meeting, the budget hedges against further losses from the COVID-19 pandemic by allocating a contingency amount of about $1.5 million. Should we come out of the pandemic sooner, that $1.5 million could be applied against the loss that was drawn down this past fiscal year. If the situation worsens, we have a little bit of a buffer to mitigate against further erosion to our financial position. I want to talk quickly about the CARES Act because the CARES Act is heavily influencing the fiscal year budget for 2020-2021. These funds, which were approved by the federal government, are highly restricted in their use. There are two places where they are influencing our budget this year. The council approved the use of $6.9 million, which was allocated to us from the federal government through Jackson County. These expenses must be related to COVID-19. They must be unbudgeted expenditures. They cannot be used for revenue loss, and they must be expenditures that occur between March the 1st and December 30th of 2020. We also were allocated $1.6 million from the Kansas City Area Transit Authority for our public transit system. With these funds, we submit monthly for reimbursement, and then KCATA will reimburse us as we submit each month. So looking forward, I want to talk quickly about what we are forecasting for the remaining 10 or 11 months of this fiscal year. Those of you out there that would like to feel optimistic about where we are heading, you would have reason to do so. You might look at what's happening with payroll growth, which is another way of talking about unemployment. There have been 3 straight months of payroll growth or a decline in unemployment. In July, payrolls increased by 1.8 million as the unemployment rate fell to 10.2% from its previous 11.1% in June. That was far better than what economists were forecasting. In Missouri, our unemployment rate has now fell to 6.9%, which puts us in the top 10 nationally. Employment has increased by over 52,000 jobs here in the state. And finally, our state has recovered nearly half of the jobs lost due to COVID-19. You might want to look at the Purchasing Managers Index or the Credit Managers Index, which are some of the traditional indices that economists use to look at economic vibrancy and activity. Those indexes are both thoroughly in growth territory, and they have recovered nearly all of what was lost pre-pandemic, back to their February levels. And finally, you might be encouraged by our housing starts, which are showing a surge of interest in markets all over the country, which they surged by about 22% over the previous month. If you'd like to be pessimistic, you would have reason to do so as well. One might look at the gross domestic product, which is again a measure of economic activity. The gross domestic product, or GDP, collapsed in the second quarter, and that was followed by another negative quarter in quarter 3. That is the very definition of the recession, as we've now seen back-to-back quarters of decline. Even though the jobless numbers have declined, they are still firmly in double digits, as I mentioned, about 10.2% nationally. If you look at the stock market, even though that has rebounded, the stock market really does not traditionally follow the overall economic activity. In many ways, the stock market's increase is a hedge against a weak economy. The factors that are driving the markets right now include a surge of interest from bargain hunters and contrarians that are really attracted by the low prices of stock and are betting that these stocks are going to recover eventually. There's also a great deal of investment of foreign money surging into the United States market, as the other global markets are in much worse shape. And finally, the PMI and CMI, which are, again, the Purchasing Managers Index and the Credit Managers Index, what we're seeing here, again, even though they're strongly in growth territory, the threats of the lockdown as the virus does continue to surge, those numbers may be weakened as governments decide to go back down into lockdown territory. I did mention that housing stocks were up, but I will also mention that they are still down by 11% from the last year. And this latest increase is likely based on the fact that mortgage rates are at record lows, as that trend does continue to attract new homeowners to the market. So these numbers, again, are better than what they were, but they are still not back to the pre-pandemic levels in many ways. So the good news reports, those are legitimate, and they may well full signal an economy that is more resilient than it has been assumed to be. But it is also important to note and look at the reports individually to determine what might be responsible for the movement and exercise caution when looking at the negative news. Everything in the economy has been impacted by the pandemic to one degree or another, but this reaction is not the same for every sector. So if you want to know likely what is going to impact our recovery moving forward, I think you can look at 3 issues. You could look at the spread of the virus. If the virus is not able to get under control, the threats of lockdown are going to remain real. If the virus is under control, then I think the economy begins to expand moving forward. Consumer behavior is a very important indicator. If consumers are not confident about their own financial position, then they are not going to be willing to spend. And as of right now, consumer confidence does continue to decline. It's at 84.8 points in August, which was the lowest level since May of 2014. And because consumer confidence does account for 70% of economic activity in the United States, a drop off in confidence is going to be a very strong indicator of where we're headed. And then finally, we do live in a global economy. So the resumption of imports and exports, many of you have probably heard about the trade wars, particularly with China. If our countries continue to be in those aggressive patterns, that will continue to stymie and choke off the economy. So I want to quickly talk about a couple of scenarios for a forecast. There are some economists out there who are very pessimistic and they see a continued decline. These are the ones that think the virus will not get under control anytime soon, that lockdown measures are going to be reimposed, and that's going to lead to a further decline in the economy. At the other end of the spectrum, there are those economists who are very optimistic. They think a vaccination is right around the corner. And once we have that, there will be an immediate resumption in economic activity. So they are looking forward to what they call the swoosh, which is named after the Nike logo. If you can picture the Nike swoosh, they see a very sharp, dramatic rebound coming just around the corner. Probably just by a hair, the most probable scenario is one that splits the difference. There's a lot of indicators that a vaccine is coming, but maybe not as fast as some are hoping for. So there are those who think that economic activity is going to continue to remain steady and then begin to bounce back later in the final quarter of this calendar year, and then really begin strong in the first quarter of 2021. Any of these three scenarios are probably very real, but most economists are leaning towards scenario 3 right now. As I mentioned, the virus is going to be the number one thing that impacts our financial position. I mean, the economy was strong pre-pandemic. So as soon as this goes away, that's probably a strong sign that we'll bounce back. I would point out on this slide, the very last line, the 14-day average percent positive for Jackson County is about 17%. And the reason I point that out is on this slide, if you look at that red line, that is the Mid-America Regional Council 9-county area percent positive. The purple line is the Eastern Jackson County percent positive. You can see that both of those are well above 10%. And our public health officials tell us we need to be at or below 5%, which is that yellow green line down below, in order to resume our normal day-to-day behaviors pre-pandemic. So we do certainly, as you look at this chart, have a ways to go. There is some good news out there that we are starting to see some decline if you look at those last two bars, but we still certainly have a ways to go to get below 10% and eventually below 5%. A couple of other pressure points I will quickly mention beyond the virus. Our good friends in the Missouri General Assembly every year seem to come up with some very problematic ideas related to local control and some of our local revenue streams. For example, last year we battled back an elimination of the cable franchise fee. Had we lost that, the general fund would have lost $1.5 million in revenue. So we'll need to stay vigilant when the General Assembly comes back into session in January. Look out for bills that would be harmful to our revenue stream and try to negotiate those away. I think COVID-19 only brought gas to the fire in the changes that were happening with online sales. So as those migrate away rather from the traditional brick and mortar and into the online sales, that will further erode our general local option sales tax revenue. Health insurance costs, both for the City of Independence and nationally, are probably going to be impacted by the strain on the medical industry as a result of COVID-19. I know our Stay Well Committee is closely looking at this. But as they're doing so, I think there's already some indications that premium increases are going to be on the table and a conversation for us coming up. And as the city pays for 80% of our self-funded health insurance costs, that would be a very real impact to our budget and our financial position. As you all know, it's been a pretty mild summer, relatively speaking, and in a lot of cases, a pretty wet summer. So probably not going to see the level of electric use or water use that we've historically seen, which will again have an impact on our payment in lieu of taxes or pilots. And then finally, the Jackson County property tax assessments, the boondoggle that was the property tax assessments of last year. The county is still working through an appeals process. Last year's budget, we had to reduce by about $500,000 total and about $140,000 specifically in the general fund as a result of the tax assessment appeals. The county has told us that there may be further appeals that would impact our budget. So we're probably going to need to be aware of that moving forward. So my last slide here, I want to specifically mention my recommendations for this committee today. The committee had previously authorized a loan of $25 million. Based on where we finished fiscal year 1920, I do not see a need for a full $25 million loan. So it would be my recommendation that this committee carry a recommendation forward to the city council to reduce the amount of the authorized loan down to $12.5 million, releasing $12.5 million back, reserving $12.5 million for potential needs in fiscal year 2021, and then reviewing our financial position mid-year, which is around December, to determine the status of the remaining $12.5 million. I specifically mentioned doing a review at mid-year because our budget historically is impacted greatly by sales during the holiday shopping season. So I would like to see what comes in our December sales tax numbers. And depending what's happening with the pandemic and depending on what happens with our sales tax numbers, we would make a new recommendation to this committee and the full council about the remaining $12.5 million. So that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions that this committee has.
Mr. Walker, thank you very much. I know that we're looking at passing the levy in October. Is that right? We're sort of going to be stuck with Jackson County at the last minute asking us to adopt a levy.
That's correct.
Do we need to be worried about this in any way, shape, or form with this $25 million?
What I've been told by the county administrator, Troy Schulte, is that the city has probably already absorbed the biggest impact of the appeals. The county is going to run one more report on September 8th and give us our figures as of September 8th, but he believes that we have absorbed the biggest bulk of those appeals with $500,000 that we absorbed in 1920.
And so assuming we get it mid-September, when do we vote on it? October?
We have to have this turned in and adopted by October 1. So we would need the council to adopt this either at their September 21st meeting or have a adjourned meeting at the September 28th study session and adopt it then. But we need to have this done by October the 1st.
And once we adopt it, we can relax a little bit, right?
As far as those assessments.
Those numbers. Yeah. Okay. 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 Well, gentlemen, what would you like to do? I'm sure somebody wants to make a motion. Everybody's being so polite. My goodness.
I'll make a motion to,
As long as my attorney commission works, I'd make a motion to the recommendation of the city manager send it to the city council, full council.
I'll second that.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Mr. City Manager, thank you very much. We needed some good news and you gave it to us and we sincerely appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So this recommendation will go to council at our next meeting, which is not this Monday because it's the 5th Monday, but the following Monday, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Madam Chairwoman, I do have a couple of questions, if I may.
Yes, sir.
Mr. City Manager, when we're talking about the health insurance and the committee that's reviewing that and staying on top of that, the concern that I have is for our non-representative employees who did not receive a pay increase of the minimum of 1% this year, that if there is a insurance premium that may be coming down the line next year or the year after next, that, and I know it's a numbers thing, and we've got to work diligently with our budget to get them an increase. So a pay increase. So whenever, and hopefully it doesn't happen anytime soon, that there is an insurance increase, that they don't take a decrease in that pay in theory because of that health insurance increase, if that makes sense.
It does make sense, and I can tell you that the assistant city manager on here, Adam Norris, and I have had that conversation, and we are going to work diligently to try to mitigate the impact of any premium increase. You know, obviously being a self-funded health insurance plan, we've got to make sure that that fund stays solvent. By the same token, your point is very much shared by us, that we're very sympathetic to the financial position of our own employees and want to do everything within our manpower to try to limit any pay deduction, or reduction, I should say, as you have so eloquently put it, council member.
And one more step further on that, I'm trying to remember the makeup of that committee. Is there any non-representative individuals that are on that committee that can represent the non-representative employees?
Yes, we do have two members who represent the non-represented employees on that committee.
Okay, good. Second, online sales. I mean, that's going to be a big thing. Can we, I know we got our legislative team down there keeping track, try to push to where municipalities can get online sales across the board. We still got to keep our eye on that tremendously, because that's going to be the nature of where municipal funding is going to go. Thirdly, $1.2 million in overtime by the fire department. Not getting too much in the weeds and open up a huge can of worms, but that's a tremendous amount. And looking at the numbers, that's police department only had 369,000. I'm looking at that right.
Police department actually in under budget by $369,000, whereas the fire department was over by 1.2 million.
No, you're right. I didn't see the parentheses there. There's that. So what discussion points need to be had to figure that out?
One thing that I can tell you will be different about the current fiscal year you're in versus the one that you just saw is this city has not funded at a historical level the minimum staffing costs, which are contractually obligated by our agreement with the IAFF. The budget the council adopted this year and went into effect July the 1st does have the minimum staffing costs in it, which is about $400,000. So that will help reduce that amount by actually budgeting for a expense there. So we're a little bit more structurally balanced. You know, the fire chief and I do have these conversations about how we effectively manage our FLSA costs, which relates to leave time, council member. It's a fancy way of saying that. It's a federal law related to leave time. We are a bit hamstrung though with some of the provisions of the contract though about who council members, employment, et cetera. And so that is something as we're in negotiations, I think we're going to want to find the right balance there as well.
Agreed. I mean, that's a contractual thing, and negotiations will take place with that, but we can't continually sustain a $1.2 million overture. That's
No, we can't.
Very tough to do.
Any other questions for Mr. Walker? Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Walker. Finally, Mr. Telma Perry, upcoming audit subjects for management analysts. Do you want, I'm going to mute myself. Take it away.
Okay, Madam Chair. I sent the committee a memo a few weeks ago detailing my work plan, proposed work plan for the committee. Would you like me to briefly go through that?
I would, thank you.
Part of the work plan is premised on the mission of the management analyst that says that the management analyst shall systematically and continuously examine the works of all city departments to identify opportunities to reduce costs, increase efficiency and effectiveness, or otherwise improve management of city programs and resources. Given that charge, and given the presentation we just listened to from the city manager and the discussion about overtime, the first and primary duty project for the FY21 annual audit plan for me is to build upon the work I did with the IPL budget using the activity-based budget and metrics template to go through and identify for certain key city programs activity budgets and performance metrics so that we can make sure that the essential services that they represent are strengthened, that we are spending our resources, the vital resources, the basic resources and services that we have for the community, that we're spending efficiently and effectively.
Okay, so you're gonna build on the audit you already did.
Correct.
Okay.
Using a template of breaking down the budget, looking internally at the budgets, and identifying activities and resources that go into running those services. The idea is, again, part of the approach of the management analyst is to compare those against certain criteria, which would include whether or not they are meeting the purpose assigned by the council. So are we doing the right things, the things that the council has recommended?
Well, one of your findings, Mr. Toma Perry, was you questioned if the combustion turbines, if we really needed to spend as much money as we were budgeting. Is that what you're talking about? Are you going to look at that? Are you going to look at, is that an efficient use of tax dollars?
No,
or, okay.
I'm sorry, when I talk about building on the IPL template, the way that I went in as part of the IPL audit and identify the activity budgets within things like production.
Okay, within their department.
Within the department.
Okay.
No, I'm not talking about going back and doing more work on the IPL budget.
Okay. Okay.
So that's number one. What were you thinking on number two? Because I want you to do the police, you know that.
Well, police would be included. And if I just jump down, within the police department, I'd be looking at the patrol function, investigations, tactical, special enforcement, community services, the police sales tax. So those are the big budget categories that we currently look at. And what are the activities within those? You know, like within investigations, we've got the budget talks about a criminal investigations unit, a drug enforcement unit, career criminals unit. How are we allocating resources within that investigations budget?
Personnel and inventory?
I mean,
Yes.
okay.
So total resources, vehicles, you know, how are all those allocated for the investigative purpose, for the patrol purpose, et cetera. Within community development, we'll look at the neighborhood services and regulated industry.
Wait, before you leave the cap.
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested in an inventory. I'd like to know, for example, how many police cars do we have? How many are outfitted with the computers that they're ready to roll? And how many are sitting around waiting? Like, are you going to be doing that type of thing also?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we'll go in and identify all the resources available
Okay.
for the patrol, for all the functions. And those expenditures, just talking about vehicles specifically, those all come out of the police sales tax fund. So we'd be looking at the full fleet and how much is allocated for the acquisition, what they're planning to do, how often they replace the fleet, things like that.
Okay, thanks.
So then community development, we'd look at the neighborhood services, both the complaint inspections as well as the proactive inspections where we will sweep a certain area and look for violations and work with homes associations to work with neighbors to improve their properties. And regulated industries, food inspections, environmental inspections, the inspections of the restaurants, childcare centers, swimming pools, things like that. These are all fee-based, the regulated industries. are fee-based. So all those business licenses, we want to go in and see if the fees are supporting the costs of the regulation, which would be the,
Be in that?
yes.
Okay.
Um,
Would you make a note, if it's not, I don't mean for it to take a whole bunch of time out of your audit, but I'd like a comparison or rundown of what you think of the food truck licensing that we do. Believe it or not, it's apparently fairly expensive compared to other things. It's kind of hard to do here. So we may be missing out on some business for some local folks.
I'll be happy to make sure we look.
I appreciate that.
Then moving on, fire would be the next. We talked about operations, fire operations. Are costing us 1.2 million in overtime. Hopefully we'll be able to drill into that and determine the causes there. I know historically, overtime is driven by people that are that are on workers' comp time, the time off, they've been hurt on the job, so they're not there. I know military deployments in the past have cut back on staff. So with minimum staffing requirements that are part of our contract with the firefighters, then that's what's driving that need. If we have a reduced number of personnel available, then we're going to have more people get called in off shift. So that'd be one thing to sit down and look at, analyze, see what the experience has been, talk with the chief about what's been happening. Try to get behind the reason for that 1.2 a little bit more.
Well, in that situation.
I'd be curious to know what other cities do, because I know with our contracts, we do have minimum staffing. And I know that if you're a probationary firefighter, you don't count
Right.
until you've been there, I think 90 days. And so if you've got a situation where you need 4 men or women on a truck and a call comes in and one of those 4 is the minimum staffer, I'm sorry, the probationary person, you need a 5th person.
Right.
So I'm curious, is that normal? Do other cities do 90 days probationary period? I have no idea.
Every contract is unique.
Right.
But I mean, that's a safety issue. I think what the firefighters would argue is that until somebody gets through the academy and is trained, that they don't want.
Take a look at it. That's all I'm saying.
Exactly. That'd be another one of those factors, like the people on workers' comp and et cetera. Within parks and recreation and tourism, the park maintenance functions, the mowing, all the mowing that goes on for city parks and athletic fields, the cemetery maintenance, ball fields, parks, sports administration, the IAC operations and facility maintenance. Within municipal services, it's primarily be a look at the street maintenance function, getting into what are we doing for overlay, the potholes and crack sealing, right-of-way maintenance, taking care of the side of the road.
And in that, remember, we
Just moved water into, or stormwater into municipal services.
Right. So the water and pollution control function would still, I think those remain a little bit off the radar for this purpose right now. The streets are really one of the core, and those are a lot of the general. I should say that these are mostly general fund. These all come out of the general revenues.
Okay.
So that's what that's what I've been dealing with primarily. And then also be looking at, we talked about overtime, but also vehicle maintenance. You know, should we move, where should we go with the central garage and the utilities? Just how are we performing that function? So those would be the candidates. Those are the candidates that I put out there. And any suggestions, any expansion or contraction of that list would be certainly be worth negotiating. My idea was that instead of this being regurgitation at the end of 6 months or so. Preferably, I'd like to get as much work done on this before the budget work really begins in January and February. For the committee to have the chance to go through and identify some of those, and maybe, if we don't get the Nike, the swoosh recovery, if it is more pessimistic, then we're going to have to, I'm sure the city will have to look at further reductions of services, and look at different options, furloughs. I know some of my former compatriots in Kansas City, Missouri, are looking at furloughs over the next year to help balance their budget. So, like Mr. Walker was saying, we're not out of the woods yet for maybe facing some of those tough decisions. But putting the council, my goal is to put the council in the position to make those choices. Two other things that I'm proposing for the year. One is to identify on a monthly financial report any analyses, any drill downs, using my expertise, my 30 plus years experience budgeting, to drill into drill down, look at issues that may be emerging, anything that might emerge out of the monthly analyses that come forward. Be able to use to supplement the finance staff and kind of do some work with the numbers after they're reported.
And I would like to get the operating and financial report at least a week ahead of time. We move this meeting to the 4th Friday of the month in order to give the finance department the opportunity to do the monthly financial and operating report and not be too hurried. And so I'd like to not be too hurried reading it.
Number 3 then would be to recommend the ongoing review of the IPL audit that was completed in June, presented last month. Part G of the city code says that the management analyst may request periodic status reports from the audited agencies. So that would be, I would recommend a quarterly report on IPL that the manager would come back on a quarterly basis and update the status of the recommendation. By and large, they agreed with most of the recommendations I made, and had talked about steps that were already underway. So a quarterly report would give them time to come back and just say, this is what over the last 3 months, we've been able to get this accomplished and move forward with this.
Mr. Nail, I see you're still on the line. The suggestion is made that IPL make a quarterly report to the Audit and Finance Committee regarding implementation of the items that were in the IPL audit that Mark Tomaferri did a month or so ago, and that was reported on in July. Is that doable with your department? Is that too much at this point?
No, that's certainly doable for us to report back on what progress we're making and what improvements we're making. And I certainly will work with Adam to provide you all with whatever information we can.
And I'm just thinking, it doesn't have to be, bells and whistles or anything like that. Just a status update quarterly regarding where are we in terms of the progress within the audit. I think that would be beneficial.
Gentlemen, along those lines,
For the thing, Mr. Dale, that you and Mr. Tomaferri agree on, part of the audit.
the change or part of
To either get together, Mr. Dale.
to ask you guys to get together, Mr. Dale, or you and put some timelines on these things.
I'm sorry, I only caught the very end of that. It was garbled.
How about, can you hear me all right now?
Yes.
Okay, my apologies. For the parts of the the recommendations Mr. Toma Perry had in his audit that you agree with or you're on board with, would it be too much to ask you to put a timeline down with some of those things too, so we can feel like we're working towards something?
I can certainly work with Adam to put together whatever we need to.
I was thinking Adam or Mark Toma Perry, whatever's appropriate, but just something to make sure we're keeping on track and going forward. That's all. But if, you know, I'm not trying to overburden you. You got a big job and you just got in there, so. That was a yes, I guess.
Well, yes, we can certainly be ready to report to you at each of these meetings. Quarterly's fine.
Is that okay with you, Mr. Norris? Does that sound like an okay thing?
Could we begin this reporting? So what the request was quarterly? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Can we begin this in October?
Yeah. Not every meeting, Jim. Just quarterly, not every meeting.
So how about we, if I may, we'll do our first report in October.
Or November.
Okay, that would be good. And then actually November would work well. And then we can kind of get on an annual every 3 months from there. So then it would be, you know, March, that type of thing. Does that work?
That'd be perfect. That'd be fine.
Okay.
Okay, Jim?
That works for me.
Okay. Okay, so we're gonna do the quarterly report. So I guess I'm tired because we've been here a couple hours now. Mr. Toma Perry, are we looking at like you doing police first and then fire and then like what is your priority?
I would recommend the last thing I wanted to mention in terms of my proposed plan was that doing various reports, any kind of research or not a full-blown audit, but a research project looking into X, Y, or Z. Similar to the police retention and recruitment report that I'm working on right now at the request of the city manager and the police chief, just to uncover, do a little bit of analysis about what's going on, different techniques, different recruitment things that could be done. So I'm in the middle of that right now. I hope to have that done before the next meeting for sure, end of September. And be getting that out to the manager and the chief so that they can be able to utilize that with their they've got hiring right now.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay, so you're doing that first. And then what's then you're doing fire, police? What's the priority list?
I think the police would be, that's going to be a little bit involved. That would take a couple of months.
How about fire?
Fire would probably take, that's going to be more straightforward, I think.
I know that I'm most interested in fire because of that overtime. Could you maybe do fire first?
I'm open to direction.
I'm on board. That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
And certainly I can begin working on both.
Sure. Sure. Okay. Okay.
So I will try. I'll have a report by the end of September on where I have fire.
Perfect.
And try to get that done. Prioritize the overtime. The overtime piece is primarily where I can begin digging into that, working with the chief and looking at the data.
That'd be great. Okay. 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 Next meeting date will be the last Friday of September. Is 1:30 good?
Yes.
I hate to end my week like this, but it tends to work.
Yes.
And Adam, if I could ask finance to get us items to review. We got a lot yesterday and I was up very, very late looking at things. If we could get them the week before, that would be terrific, especially the operating and financial reports, because I really do read them. And it was very stressful last night trying to get it all done. So if you could, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. And sorry, I'm waiting for there's a bit of a delay here on my side. Yeah, and if I remember correctly, we post the financial reports the 17th or 18th of the month on the city's website. So
Okay.
those are available there. And perhaps what we need to do is send a link to this committee to those reports when those become available, which would be that would be well in advance of the committee meeting.
That would be awesome, Adam. It's just, there's so much to look at, and I would really appreciate that link. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Is there any other business? Nothing from Mr. Hobart. Mr. Tomaperi?
Nothing.
I don't know if Mr. Walker left. I think he did. Mr. Norris, is there anything from you, sir?
Oh, no, I think we're good for today.
Okay. I thank everybody very much, and we're calling this done at 3:25. Thank you. Yes, let's leave.